If I gave you just 3 seconds to picture Southeast Asia, what comes to mind? Dense tropical jungles, palm-lined beaches, or crowded, chaotic slums? You wouldn't be wrong. That is the reality for much of the region. But right in the heart of this tropical expanse, there is a massive glitch in the matrix. A country that doesn't quite fit the pattern. It was forced into independence in 1965, and today it's just 61 years old. Yet, somehow, it didn't just survive, it broke free from its limitations and rose above them, becoming the only developed nation in Southeast Asia, and one of just a handful in all of Asia. That country is Singapore. Perched at the tip of the Malay Peninsula, Singapore sits like a sentinel over the eastern exit of the Strait of Malacca. But let's talk size, or lack thereof. And here's the crazy part. Singapore is tiny. Its entire land area is just 733 square kilometers. To put that into perspective, it's about half the size of London, smaller than New York City's 5 boroughs combined, and about 4 times smaller than Rhode Island, the smallest U.S. state. Yet on this tiny piece of land live nearly 6 million people, and despite its size, its economy has surpassed $500 billion. That's larger than countries with 20 times its population, like the Philippines or Vietnam. And its GDP per capita? Around $91,000. That's higher than the United Kingdom, its former colonial ruler. You can think of Singapore as the Israel of Southeast Asia, small, surrounded, but incredibly powerful. But here's the thing, 61 years ago, Singapore wasn't powerful, it wasn't rich, it wasn't even stable. It had no natural resources, no land, no water of its own, even sand for construction had to be imported. And unlike most countries, Singapore did not choose independence. It was kicked out of Malaysia. So, how does a country like that, a tiny island with nothing, go from a struggling port city to one of the world's top financial centers, competing with cities like Tokyo and Hong Kong, and ranking just behind New York and London? And it did it all without having a single drop of its own oil or a single acre of farmland. How does a red dot on the map turn into one of the richest nations on Earth? What's the secret? And what did Singapore get right that others didn't? In this video, we're going to break down the real story behind this red dot miracle and the ruthless strategy that turned a survival crisis into a global empire. Before we talk about Singapore, let me ask you a tough question. When a country tries to defy its fate, what matters more? Resources or people? Take a look at the map. South America and Africa are incredibly rich in natural resources: oil, gold, rare minerals. Venezuela alone holds one of the largest oil reserves in the world, even surpassing Saudi Arabia at one point. And yet, what do we see today? Instead of prosperity, we see the dark reality of the resource curse. Hyperinflation, political instability, economic collapse. So here's the real question. Are resources really a blessing? Or is something else more important? By the end of this video, you might see the answer differently. Every great nation has a defining figure. The United States had George Washington. The UK had Winston Churchill. France had Charles de Gaulle. Names that shaped history. But there's another man, less famous globally, yet just as influential in shaping his country's destiny. His name is Lee Kuan Yew. If Singapore were a company, he would be the founder and CEO. Lee Kuan Yew was born in 1923 into a Peranakan family, meaning local-born Chinese with deep Southeast Asian roots. He received elite schooling and later studied law at Cambridge. But the moment that truly shaped him was not in a classroom. It was during World War II. In 1942, under Japanese occupation, Singapore descended into chaos. During a brutal purge known as the Suk Ching Massacre, young Lee Kuan Yew was ordered onto a truck headed for execution. At the last moment, he did something extraordinary. With pure, cold-blooded composure, he looked the soldiers in the eye and convinced them to let him leave, claiming he had forgotten his luggage. It was a gamble with death, and his calm was the only thing that saved him. He stepped off the truck and walked away. Everyone else on that truck never came back. That moment left a permanent mark on him, a realization that would define his leadership. In a world ruled by power, if you lack strength, if you lack will, you don't survive. Fast forward to 1959. At just 35 years old, Lee Kuan Yew became Singapore's first prime minister. But what he inherited was far from a model city. It was a disaster. 1.6 million people crammed onto a tiny island, with unemployment hitting a staggering 14%. The city was a powder keg, with 70% of the population trapped in slums, fueled by constant strikes and violent ethnic riots. Severe ethnic tensions between Chinese, Malays, and Indians were tearing the social fabric apart. Singapore wasn't just struggling, it was on the brink. In a desperate attempt to survive, Lee pushed for a merger with Malaysia, hoping access to resources and a larger market would save the country. But that marriage lasted just 2 years. Because Singapore stood for multiracial equality, while Malaysia prioritized ethnic Malay dominance, the tension exploded. August 9, 1965, one of the darkest days in Singapore's history. During a televised press conference, the world witnessed something unexpected. Lee Kuan Yew broke down in tears. He said, "For me, it is a moment of anguish. All my life I believed in merger and unity. Those were not tears of weakness. They were tears of uncertainty. Because at that moment, no one believed Singapore could survive. A country with no natural resources, no water of its own, no strategic depth, surrounded by larger neighbors, and completely alone. To most people, this wasn't a country with potential. It was a country with no future."